This is Gemara Pesachim Daf Sadi Hey. Today's share should be a special schos refuah shleim of Chayes and Moshe ben Esther raising made of Merikir man of a Miguel Chaymen Sarshon Sin Raisel Zol Bras Kanendel. Ita Bas Yon Bas Chayes Hari Yisrael ben Medil Ali de Berdun Sharlei Shom Bas Nami of Sharfig of Khan of Davini Teriva. Shmuel ben Tila Daniel ben Khan Raisel Malka Chaya Bas Mina Li Baruch Bas Avi Musa Din Ido Bas Shena Mindol Simchatovia Bas Avigail Pashas Vi ben Figat Vaira Michael Sipar Nasatele Huva Besoich Sha'ar Chayle Yisrael. We pick it up on the top of Sadi Hey Amid Aleph, and again, we're trying to get all these shirim up nice and early so that everyone can prepare adequately for Purim, preparing in the best way to be marbe in Torah, Eira, Zu, Torah. Let's pick it up on the top above. Sadi Hey Amad Aleph says the Mishnah. Ma bein Pesach Rishon Sheni. What is the difference between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni? This entire parak basically centers around the Pesach Sheni. Now we're going to learn the differences between this and the Pesach Rishon. Harishon says the Gemara Mishnah. Asar Bal Yerabay Matzei. Have any chametz in your house? Vasheni chametz umatzah imay. You can have chametz in your house. B'bayis harishayin. Chametz imay b'bayis harishayin ta'in halal. The first one you say halal b'achilas. Vasheni ta'in halal b'achilas. However, both of them require halal while you actually bring the carbon. V'nachal and sli. Number two, they both have to be roasted. Al matzah mayrim, you have to eat it with matzah mar. V'doichen as hashabis. Now, these are not all the differences. As if you look at the top, Taisus points out that there's really other differences that Taisus points out. The first Korban Pesach is brought three kitais, three groups, and the second one is not. Taisus points out, with regard to checking the animal for 4 days, that does not exist by the Korban Pesach Sheni. And others, there are Mefarshim that explain, it said in the Mishnah that you could have chametz in your possession when you bring Pesach Sheni. Does that mean you could eat it with chametz? Can you bring your Korban Pesach and have it with a piece of challah? That is another point of contention amongst the Achrayim. Says the Gemara. Tan Rabban, we learned in the Brisa. Like all the laws of the Pesach, you should do it. It's referring to the Pesach Sheni. The pasuk is talking about the item itself. We're going to see there's going to be 3 levels. That's level number 1, the item itself, the way you do the tzli, the roasting of the Korban Pesach. Number 2, mitzvah she'al gufay minayin. How do we know auxiliary dinim? You have to eat it together with matamar. That's an auxiliary din. Still al on top of the Korban Pesach. So says the Brisa, I would think avilam mitzvah shalai al gufay. You would include even things that are not on the guf, which obviously is a bit difficult to read. Kuda said that it comes to include things ala guf. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara. You cannot break a bone. Mashvir says mitzvah shebegufay. I've got mitzvah shebegufay. Only mitzvah shebegufay. Again, we're going to have to see in the Gemara what exactly happened. Again, the Brisa first and number 1, mitzvah shebegufay applied to Pesach Sheni, roasting. Number 2, mitzvah she'al gufay apply, eating it with matzah. The third din we'll have to wait for the Gemara to explain. When the Torah says by Pesach Sheni you shall perform it, the Torah there is discussing the mitzvahs shebegufay. That is where the Torah is discussing that has to be an intrinsic part of the mitzvah. Amar, let's dissect this brisa. Yochol av mitzvah shlai ala gufay. The brisa said, again, let's get the build up. The brisa said, Pesach Sheni has to be mitzvah shebegufay. Why? Because gechol chukas. Then it said, al matzah zumarim teaches al gufay. Then it said, mitzvahs shlai al gufay. Maybe even those. Tamalay mar vetzel isish broi. Ask the Gemara, Amar Mar. The Brisa said, Yoch, I would have thought I'm mitzvah shlai gufay. Why would you think that? You just said a second ago, I've been mitzvah sheba gufay, so why would you think even mitzvah shlai gufay? The pasuk said mitzvah sheba gufay, said the Brisa. Answers the Gemara, now that you taught me that has to be eating together with matzah mar. Meaning, now that you taught me that it's not only dinim about the carbon itself, alma yaseh oisai, that when the Torah said you shall perform it lav dafkahu, it's not exactly the same. It's not only with regard to the item itself. So therefore, now I'm going to have a hava mina ema, havle kibradu klal. You would think it's a prat. It said specific, and then it said klal. It was very general. It said even other things. So you would have thought v'nase klal ma'isiv ala prat. It comes to add on one. Va'afilu kol milinami. Now we understand the buildup of the brisa. Let's explain. The brisa is number one, items pertaining to the carbon. Tzli, roasting it. Number two, even items not pertaining to the carbon. Matzamar. You told me matzamar, you expanded. Once you expand, maybe you expand everything. Maybe it even can include things not having to do with the carbon. Kamash malan, no, only items that have to do with the carbon. Isi ben Yehuda. Kamash malan, what? That's when the brisa said that etzem leisish ruba, those only items that pertain specifically to the carbon. But then Isi ben Yehuda, what did he say? He said, no, we learned it out from a different pasuk. He learned out from Yasa Oisai. Says the Gemara, Isa ben Yehuda Yetzem Ayavle. So what does Isa ben Yehuda do with the pasuk about Tzlei Rubai? If they said you already learned out from Yasa Oisai, Mibayale didn't that we've seen already La'echad Etzem Sheish B'Mayach La'echad Etzem Sheima Mayach. You have two different drushes. You have an extra drusha to include even Etzem, a bone without any marrow. For Rabbanan Ayasa Oisai, what do they do with the words of Isa ben Yehuda? Ma'avdile Mibayale She'ein Sheichlin is a Pesach Al Yachid. The new din you cannot bring Garmin Pesach for one singular person. As far as you can look after and find someone else to be involved in your carbon Pesach Sheni, you have to do it. And they learned that out from the wording of the pasuk of Ya'aseh Oy Soy. Says the Gemara, a new brisa. That was brisa number one, dealing with the differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, explaining that there's something called intrinsic with the carbon Sli, something on top of the carbon Pesach Matzomar. And then there's all other dinim. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbana, we learned in a brisa. They have to do the carbon Pesach Sheni like all the rules of the Pesach Rishon. I would think Shem Shah Rishon Asar B'Val Yirabah Yamatzei. Just like Pesach Rishon, you're not allowed to have any chametz. Kach Sheni Asar B'Val Yirabah Yamatzei. So to Pesach Sheni, you're not allowed to have any chametz. Tamalaymer says the Torah. Almat Zumar Yachlu. Therefore, it says specifically that you eat it with matzah omar, ve'in li elamat mitzvahs asay. So from there we only learn out that the mitzvahs asay of Pesach Rishon apply to Pesach Sheni. Mitzvahs lois asay minayin. How would you know that even the lois asays that you're not allowed to have any chametz? Tamalaymar says the pasuk le'yashir mimenu ad boikar. You cannot leave over any of it. I'm sorry. How do you know the lois asays not necessarily of having chametz in your house? That we know is mutter. How do you know lois asays about the carbon itself? There's a din of noiser. That's a lois as you're leaving over the carbon. How do you know that applies to Pesach Sheni? You cannot leave over until the morning. That's only a lois asay which is given over to asay, meaning it could be rectified. Mitzvahs lois asay gomer minayin tamaloymar ve'etem loisish rubai. That's a lois asay gomer, not to break the bone. And now we explain ma'aprat mefurash mitzvahs asay ve'lois asay shenitik lasay ve'lois asay gomer. Just like we see those three cases I've called all halachas of mitzvah say, loisa say, loisa say gomer, and those all apply to the Pesach Sheni. Now the Gemara explains what does this come to include. Bichlal, it's coming to include the matzah zumayim. It's coming to include that you have to eat it with matzah Maika marbi tzli eish. It comes to include, bichlala the matzah zumayri and maika marbi. When the Torah went out of its way and said you have to eat it with matzah that comes to include you have to do tzli eish. Bifradeho my mimaile. What is it coming to exclude when it is mifaret? When it says explicitly that only these dinim hashvasa se'ar. It's coming to include that you do not have to get rid of all the chametz. Again, we're marbe. We include the fact that you have to have a tzli is be roasted and you have to eat it with matzah mar. We exclude that you do not have to do hashvas asar. You do not have to get rid of all your chametz by Pesach Sheni. Says the Gemara, Epoch. How do you know you're right? Whenever we have a drasha, one excluding, one including, how do you know which is which? Maybe the opposite. Maybe we should include that you have to get rid of all the chametz and we should exclude matzah mar. Says the Gemara, mitzvah is tekufa adif, and that's going to be the theme that we're going to have a few times right now. Anytime it's a mitzvah that pertains to the item itself, a mitzvah tekufa, and now we're extending it obviously to mitzvah the al gufa, meaning to include the matzah mar, which is eaten together with the carbon, that we're quicker to include than halacha of the getting rid of the chametz, which is obviously an auxiliary din to the carbon. Says the Gemara. Now we continue. When the Torah went out of its way to explain, don't leave it over until the morning. What does that include? It comes to exclude that you're not allowed to take it out of Yerushalayim. B'fratel might come in Ma'ile. What's it coming to exclude? La yirav la yimatzeh. That you can't have any chametz. Says the Gemara, Eipachana. Maybe the opposite. Maybe the opposite. Says the Gemara, mitzvah, the gufa, adif. Again, the same answer, that the mitzvahs of the gufa are going to be better. Before we continue, we have a moment. Let's just see Rashi at the end of the Amid. Rashi explains, says, says Rashi, 3 lines to the bottom, this is the pasuk that teaches me you're not allowed to bring your carbon outside. I said outside Yerushalayim really means outside of your chabura, outside of your group, umashma, loy tzaitzi. You can only eat it in one house. I would have thought that's which we learned that's what it's coming to exclude. And then we said that what's it coming to be, that's what's coming to include, I'm sorry. What's it coming to exclude is the last Rashi says that if you don't get rid of it on the first day of Pesach, you have to get rid of it on any subsequent days that you find the chametz in your house. Which is a big discussion, as you see here, and Taisus points out whether it's a lav and nitik laseh or not. That is stage number 2. And number 3, pasuk b'chalel etzem l'sish b'rubai. Again, just to get the framework here, we have 3 different psukim that are coming to be marbeh. We have the pasuk of etzem l'sish b'rubai. We have the pasuk of l'sisir mimenu at Boiker, and we had the first pasuk of Kechol Chukas HaPesach. No, that was not the first pasuk. Said the Gemara, what was the first? Sorry, we had the first pasuk of Matzah Umayrim. Let's point out all the pasukim. Pasuk number 1 is Matzah Umayrim. That was the first pasuk being Marbeh. We had the second pasuk of Lo Yishir Menu Ad Boiker, and now we have the third pasuk of Lo Sishru Bai. 3 times the Torah spoke out dinim by the Pesach Sheni, and each one is teaching me a special din. So this third pasuk of Lo Sishru Bai says the Gemara as we move along to Sadiyayim and Beis might come Marbeh. What's that coming to include? Al Tachlu Menu Na. It's coming to include that you can't eat it raw, as Rashi the top points out that you're chayv for the Pesach Sheni. Befaratel might come in ma'il lo yisishrat al chametz tam zivchi, that you can't shecht on the chametz. Eibach hana says Gemara, no, again mitzvahs de gufa is going to be adif. Any mitzvah that has to do intrinsically with the carbon itself. Says the Gemara, Harisha inetan hala b'achilasa. Continuing the halachas of the difference between carbon pesach harisha and carbon pesach sheni. The first one you have to say halal while you eat it. The second one you do not. No, and immediately says the Gemara, where do we know this from? Amar Rav Yechon Mishav Shemin Yoy Sadak. 5 lines down. So the Yom and the Beis Amar Krat says in the Torah, Hashir yeh lochem. It says in the pasuk that it should be a shear for you. Kolil hiskadish chag. 1 second, I think I read that wrong. One more time. Where's the pasuk says, "But Shirya lochem kilel." Yeah, that's the right word. Kilel, like the night of his kaddish chag, like the night that it became the yontif became sanctified. Laila hamikudish lechag ta'in halel. So the Gemara explains that the nighttime, which is a yontif referring to Pesach Rishon, requires halel. Laila shein mekudish lechag ein ta'in halel. The light time, which does not have yontif with it, does not need halel. That refers to the Pesach Sheni. And now we conclude v'zeh ta'in halel. They both require halal when you bring them, meaning the actual bringing of the carbon pesach. We saw in the beginning parakim, you have the whole line of the koyanim and the leviim singing at the time of the bringing it. That is necessary even by the Pesach Sheni. My taima says the Gemara, iba yisema laila kamemayit yoim, lo iba yisema laila kamemayit yoim like kamemayit. Says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me that it says Laila, we're not going to exclude the daytime. Viba Yisema. And if you're going to tell me Efshar Yisrael Shechlan is V'schem and Aitan is Lulveim Vein Oimrin Halel, that's the second answer. I'm sorry. The first answer is one more time. Iba Yisema Laila Kamemayit Yoim Loy Kamemayit. One more time. Let's go back and read this like a mensch. My time, one more time. What is the reason we know there's going to be a halal when you bring the Pesach Sheni? We never excluded the daytime. That's one reason. And the second teretz is a fundamental teretz. The second teretz is a fascinating teretz. The second teretz says, is it possible? You're bringing a carbon, you're not going to sing. You're not going to say halal. Fascinating. Look at Rashi. Rashi points out, Efsher, the kivan the davar mitzvah ton halal. Very paramdik. We're Erev Purim over here. You're doing a mitzvah, you need halal, you need to be joyous, you need to sing. That is the fundamental reason, says the Gemara, why you sing halal when you bring the carbon pesach, because how could you not? How could you not? And the fact that the Gemara throws in noitel lulvehem to bring your lula of the Mefarshim uses rayas, a different dinim. Says the Gemara, v'nacholim sli, and the pesach sheni has to be eaten roasted. Says the Gemara, Shabbos in Toma loy. Masnisan, and what does that teach us? The loy Rav Yehuda. That teaches me not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya is learned in the Brayso. Doichas Shabbos ve'ein doichas Toma. We see that the Karban Pesach Sheni is going to be doichas Shabbos, but it's not going to be doichas Toma. But Rabbi Yehuda Imerav doichas Toma. It's even going to be doichas Toma. So our Mishnah, which is meduyak, that it's only doichas Shabbos and not Toma, that is a raya not like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, my time at the Tanakama. How does the Tanakama know that the Karban Pesach Sheni is doichas Shabbos and not Toma, which is also the din in our Mishnah? Mimnei Toma dechiyasav yachzer v'yaseh b'Toma. Says the Gemara, it makes no sense. The whole reason, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. What's the reason that Tanakama says that it's not going to be Doicha Toma, it's yes going to be Doicha Shabbos, which is the same thing as our Mishnah? Answers the Gemara, what's the whole reason you got into this mess in the first place? Why are you bringing a Pesach Sheni? You're bringing a Pesach Sheni because you were telling me the first time. So you're going to tell me you're bringing because you told me the first time and you're going to do it again with Toma? That makes no sense. When Toma, we push you up because of Toma. Yachzer v'yaseh b'Toma, you want to do it again with Toma? Fascinating svara. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Rabbi Yehuda says, you can even bring it b'Toma. Rabbi Yehuda, he says, Atayra chazra love, lasais, b'tayra, lo yezacha, yaseh b'Toma. The Torah says you can do it again, and if you can't, you can even do it b'Toma. The whole reason you got into this mess was because of Tameh. That's true, but if it happened again, says Rabbi Yehuda, you're allowed to do it b'Toma. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. Pesach Rishon Deichas Shabbos, Pesach Sheni Deichas Shabbos. Pesach Rishon Deichas Esatoma. Pesach Sheni Deichas Esatoma. Tanakama opinion. Pesach Rishon Ton Lina. Pesach Sheni Ton Lina. What's this Lina? This is a bit of a different Lina. This is not the Lina like we've seen in the past of leaving the carbon overnight. This is a Lina that you have to stay in Yerushalayim overnight when you bring your carbon. Deichas Atoma Keman. Where do we see that it's Deichas Atoma? Rabbi Yehuda. Like we just said, this price is going with Rabbi Yehuda. The Pesach Sheni is even brought B'Toma. Well, Rabbi Yehuda Ton Lina. But wait, the rest of the price, does Rabbi Yehuda concur that you have to stay overnight when you bring a carbon? But down we learned in the price of Rabbi Yehuda, how do we know by Pesach Sheni you do not have to stay overnight? You get up in the morning, you go to your tent, and it says, for 6 days, you eat matzah. So if you do darshins, the carbon that needs to be eaten for 6, a regular Pesach Rishon, a potential that it's Yom Tiv, that's when ta'an lina. Sheina nechel shisha ain't ta'an lina. So says the Gemara, how do you feel with Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda, you're right, says you can bring a batama, but the rest of the brisa that said you have to do lina, you have to stay overnight when you bring the carbon. Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to that opinion. Answers the Gemara, Trei Tanai Vali, but Rabbi Yehuda, there's two different opinions in Rabbi Yehuda. Just one interesting din of this whole din of Lina, that the din is that when you bring a carbon, you have to stay overnight in Yerushalayim. This is one of the reasons why they bring that a Kohen Gadol had to live in Yerushalayim, because the Kohen Gadol brought carbonis every single day, and therefore, every single day he has to stay overnight there, so his house has to be in Yerushalayim. And that was the first set of differences that we had between the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni. Again, by the Pesach Rishon, you have to get rid of all your chametz. By the Pesach Rishon, you say halal in your house when you eat it, whereas by the Pesach Sheni, you're allowed to have chametz, and by the Pesach Sheni, you do not say halal. But by the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni, you have to say halal when you're bringing it. You have to eat it bitzli, you have to eat it with matzah mar, and they're both Deicha Shabbos. Whether the Pesach Sheni is Deicha Toma, that was this last discussion that we just had. The Tanakama said, absolutely not. The whole reason you got into this mess is because of Toma. No way is it Deicha Toma. Rav Yehuda says, no. What's the problem? It's true, but now we have an invention called Pesach Sheni, and there's no limitation on that invention of Tama. We concluded with a brisa. The brisa seemingly was bothered That if Rav Yehuda's the opinion that says you can bring a betama, what about the halacha of lina of staying overnight? Rav Yehuda does not subscribe to that. We answered this two Tanaim within the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Mishnah about 2/3 of the way down, so the Yom and the Beis Pesach sheba betama lo yochal mimenu zavim v'zavais nidas v'yaladis. A Pesach that is brought betama azavais. These are halachas that we've seen already. Anida yaladis are not allowed to get involved in such a carbon. V'machlu patur min karis. They're not allowed to eat it, but if they do, they don't get karis. Rav Eliezer pointer off al bias mikdash. Rav Eliezer says not only are you potter from eating the carbon, but even if you walk further into the Beis HaMikdash, you're potter from that as well. Let's see in the Gemara what exactly this means. Tanu Rabbanan Zavin v'Zavais nidas v'yaladish achlu Pesach Shabbat b'tama. Again, we have a carbon Pesach that was brought b'tama. It was allowed to be brought b'tama. This is a case, as Rashi points out, that we're talking about that the Sibur brought a betama, but again, a zav and a zav, those are people that are not allowed to eat a betama. So what happened? Shaklu Pesach Shabbat betama yachal. You would have thought yechayavim. You would have thought again that these people, since they're not allowed to get involved in the carbon, if they do, they're chayiv karis for eating a carbon. The Pesach they're not allowed to. Tamalaymar says the Gemara, Kol tar yechal basar. Anyone who is tar can eat the flesh. Va'anefesh yechal basar mizbech hashlamim asher laHashem. And if you eat the carbon, you can have tama and you're going to be cut off. So we darshan, when you have the first part of the pasuk, when you have the pasuk that says that this is a carbon that is eaten by tar people, that's when that's when you have the latter half of the pasuk, that if someone who is tame eats that carbon, you get karis. However, if we have a carbon that's not eaten by tar people like this carbon, then there's no that if someone who is tamei zav yaledis nida that would eat it, they would not get karis. Rav Eliezer Aimer comes along Rav Eliezer and he adds on a different din. Yachal, you would have thought dachiku zavim v'nichlasu la'azara b'pesach haba b'tama. You have a zav. They're tamei. They're not allowed to come to the Beis HaMikdash. And you would have thought they're also not allowed to eat the carbon Pesach. They ate it, they don't get karis. What happens if they push their way and they also went into the Azara? You would have thought, says Rav Eliezer, you would think they're not allowed to be there. They're tamei. What are they doing in the Beis HaMikdash? But Tama Laimar says Rav Eliezer is similar to Joshua. Says the Torah v'yishalchu min ha'machane kol tzura v'chol zav. You have to be sent out of the camp. Anyone who's a saras or a zav v'chol tamei l'nefesh. Anyone who's tamei meis. Now Rav Eliezer is a similar Joshua to the Joshua we just had. When a tamei meis is sent out of the camp, then they're not allowed to come to the Beis HaMikdash. Ain't tamei meis mishtalchin, but at a time when tamei meis is not sent out, then ain't tamei meis mishtalchin. Then they're not sent out, and therefore says Rabbi Eliezer a fascinating din that if you have a zav who's not allowed to come into the Azara, but we're at a time right now that a tamei meis could be. Why? Because we're b'shech to the carbon Pesach al tama. At that time, if the zav goes and pushes his way in incorrectly, he will not be chayiv kares. Just like says Rabbi Eliezer, paralleling the first part of the Mishnah, he's not chayiv kares from eating from that carbon Pesach. Let's just learn a few more lines. What about someone who's tamei meis? He goes all the way into the heichal. He's definitely not going to be there. What happens then? Says the Gemara, do we say now we have a fascinating case that never happens? We have someone who's tamei meis is allowed to go into the Azara. So do we say once we permit him to go to the Azara, we allow him to go all the way into the heichal? Or my ishtri that was permitted. So if a tamei meis goes all the way in to the heichal, he's going to be chayiv. Amar Rava, Amar Kra, the second white line, even if it's sent out of partial of the camp, and therefore in this case, it is not, and that is from the Azara. It says the Gemara, Iked Yamri, a second answer, Amar Rava, Amar Kra, you have to send them out of the camp. Now Rava explains, whenever you're sent out of the camp, then but if you're not sent out of the camp, then there's no din of not being allowed to go into the Heichal, and therefore he's going to learn that you're going to be allowed, that you're not going to be chayiv for going into the heichal. As you see in the last Rashi over here, Rashi explains that Veishalchum in Amachna Azara, Kakibel Rabbi Vinir Ali, the Ifcha Girsala. And Rashi is a bit of a different Girs on the Gemara. We're concluding with this. Whenever you're out of the camp, when they don't have to be sent all the way, then therefore will not be a problem for the Tamei Meis to go into the Eichel. We'll pick up from Rav Yosef tomorrow.